Welcome to the winter of 2021, a period now burned into mountaineering history as the Black Season on K2. The Savage Mountain demanded a heavy blood price that year, claiming the lives of 5 climbers in total. While the world mourned the loss of legends like Ali Sadpara and Snorri, there is another tragic story buried in the snow, the heartbreaking final expedition of Atanas Skatov. Skatov was no rookie. He was a seasoned alpinist with 10 8,000ers on his resume. Yet he met his end plummeting from the icy, unforgiving face of the Black Pyramid. The climbing community is still asking the hard questions. Was it a mechanical failure of his safety rope, or was it a fatal lapse in judgment born from a mind shattered by exhaustion, fighting for inches of space in a dangerously overcrowded camp? We are going to dissect the anatomy of this disaster, uncovering details that suggest this loss might have been avoidable. But first, study the man himself. He doesn't look like a rugged alpinist. He looks like he belongs in a sterile white lab coat. That's because Atanas Skatov's natural habitat wasn't the death zone. It was among stacks of academic research papers in Berlin. Walking the corridors of the world-renowned Humboldt University, he wasn't known as a daredevil adventurer. He was a brilliant mind, a prodigy who secured his PhD by the tender age of 25, a true intellectual phenomenon. While other young men were out chasing thrills and adrenaline rushes, Atanas was out in the field chasing bugs, quite literally. He was a dedicated entomologist specializing in plant protection. His universe was defined by the microscopic, not the majestic. His days revolved around pest control, crop analysis, and writing lengthy dissertations. It was a secure, quiet existence with zero risks. If you looked at his physique back then, you wouldn't find a single trace of iron muscle or the stamina needed for high altitude. In fact, until he hit 32, his athletic resume was practically non-existent. It was a blank page. Well, almost blank. There was one solitary footnote. As a young boy in his hometown of Sliven, he performed with a folk dance troupe called Trakice. That little bit of dancing was the absolute ceiling of his physical exertion. For 14 consecutive years, Atanas unwittingly ran a long-term experiment on his own body, total and complete sedentary living. He migrated between lecture halls, libraries, and office desks. A swivel chair was his cockpit. His heart rate rarely spiked above a resting rhythm. To everyone who knew him, his path was carved in stone. He was destined to become a distinguished professor, perhaps lead the agronomy department, and grow old surrounded by dusty books. Nobody, not his family, not his colleagues, and certainly not Atanas himself, imagined there was a dormant beast sleeping inside this mild-mannered academic, waiting for the right moment to wake up and tear his life apart. The catalyst was a distance of 650 kilometers. That is the span that cleaved his life into before and after. In the summer of 2010, this desk-bound theorist does something completely out of character. He stands at the trailhead of the legendary Kam route. This is no Sunday stroll. It is a punishing odyssey across the entire backbone of Bulgaria, traversing the spine of the Stara Planina Mountains. For a man whose heaviest lift in years was a microscope, this was hell on earth. His legs seized his muscles, screamed in agony. Yet amidst that exhaustion, a strange alchemy took place. Skatov didn't shatter under the pressure. Instead, he felt like he was finally filling his lungs with oxygen for the very first time. He would later capture this moment with a sentence that sealed his fate. "I fell in love with the mountain, and she fell in love with me." This affair with the high altitude moved fast and hit hard. When Skatov returned to civilization, the walls of his laboratory felt like they were closing in on him. The life he had built, the tenure, the titles, the academic conferences, no longer looked like success. It looked like a prison cell. The stale air of the office became unbreathable. He looked around at his fellow scientists and knew he didn't belong to their tribe anymore. January 2012 marked the point of no return. Atanas made a choice that shocked his circle even more than his hiking obsession. He completely eliminated animal products from his life. He went full vegan. This is where the scientist in him took the wheel again. He wasn't just changing what he ate, he was initiating a global experiment with his own body as the primary subject. In the high-stakes world of mountaineering, where protein and caloric density are religion, this was absolute heresy. But Atanas stood his ground. He decided to fuse his newfound obsession with the peaks with his analytical background. He announced a loud, ambitious objective to become the world's premier high-altitude vegan mountaineer. He wanted to prove to the skeptics that human willpower and spirit matter far more than whether you have steak or tofu on your plate. The agronomist was tossed aside. In his place rose a new brand and a new identity, the vegan warrior, prepared to battle the death zone. It took only 3 short years to transport this man from a comfortable swivel chair to the very roof of the world. By 2013, Atanas had the throttle pinned to the floor. He charged into the 7 Summits Challenge, and his progress didn't look like an athlete's development. It looked like a rocket launch. He ticked off Kilimanjaro, then immediately set his sights on Elbrus. For the average adventurer, these are lifetime capstones. For Skatov, they were merely warm-ups, field tests for his grand theory. The mountains served as his open-air laboratory. He meticulously monitored his physiology, testing how a plant-based engine ran in hypoxic conditions. Hypothesis, experiment, data. Then came 2014, and the difficulty curve spiked vertically. Atanas flew to South America to confront Aconcagua. Here he tossed the safety manual out the window. He went solo. No support team, no guides, no safety net from a partner. What takes standard expeditions weeks of slow acclimatization, he crushed in a single continuous push. 3 days. That is all it took for the former bug scientist to sprint to the highest point in the southern hemisphere. The climbing community checked their watches in disbelief. This guy was rewriting the rules of human physiology. But the ultimate prize was waiting. In the spring of that very same year, Skatov arrived in Tibet. Looming above him was Everest. And he didn't pick the tourist-heavy southern route. He chose the brutal northern face, a place where the winds are strong enough to blow a yak off the ridge. Inch by inch, fighting through the freezing mist, he ascended to altitudes where even jetliners cruise. And then he was there. Atanas claimed the title of the first vegan to summit Everest. It should have been a triumphant conclusion to his experiment. Instead, the descent brought a firestorm of controversy. Rumors began to swirl in base camp before exploding into what became known as the honey scandal. It was revealed that up in the death zone, when his energy reserves were crashing, Atanas had consumed a small amount of honey. To a normal person, this sounds absurd. What is the difference? But to the orthodox vegan community, this was treason. Honey is a product of animal exploitation. Technically, the scientific purity of his experiment was contaminated. This moment, however, revealed the true steel of Skatov's character. He could have buried the secret, nobody checks your pockets at 8,000 meters. Instead, he chose radical transparency. He stood up and admitted, yes, I needed a burst of fast energy to survive, and I did it. The confession polarized his followers. Critics called him a fraud chasing headlines, while supporters praised his honesty. But one fact was undeniable. The man who was filing paperwork just yesterday was now gazing down at the planet from its ceiling. Forget the honey jars and the internet comments for a moment. The game was about to get lethal. By 2015, Atanas Skatov had shed the skin of an eccentric amateur. He was stepping into an arena where a miscalculation costs more than a failed paper. It costs your life. His target was Manaslu, the 8th highest peak on Earth, towering at 8,163 meters. Here, pragmatism won out. For the first time, he utilized supplemental oxygen. Standing atop Manaslu flipped a switch in his brain. Atanas realized he wasn't just lucky, he was capable, and he wanted it all. He officially announced the 14 by 8,000 project. His goal to seize the crown of the Himalayas by summiting all 14 of the world's 8,000ers. For a guy who wheezed his way through a hiking trail 5 years prior, this sounded like absolute lunacy. But Skatov approached it with the methodical precision of a lab technician. 2016 arrived, and he locked onto Annapurna 1, arguably the most treacherous climb in the Himalayas. It isn't the tallest giant, but it is a serial killer. Annapurna holds one of the most terrifying fatality rates in mountaineering history. The data is chilling. Historically, nearly 30% of climbers who attempt to touch the top never come back down. Researchers cite it as the ultimate example of objective danger. The mountain is falling apart. The slopes are unstable, riddled with complex ice falls, and prone to massive spontaneous avalanches. The terrain is a chaotic, unpredictable beast. For any climber, this is one of the most technically demanding and mentally draining routes in existence. Picture yourself at the base looking up, knowing that statistically, 1 out of every 3 people standing next to you will become a frozen fixture of the landscape. Yet Atanas geared up. Moving with a strong team, he pushed upward, conquering zones that have turned back the world's best alpinists. On May 1st, he stood victorious on the summit of Annapurna. This was his validation. Where veterans with decades of experience had been broken, the vegan scientist prevailed. He made it down alive and scratch-free. In that moment, a dangerous conviction took root. His system was perfect. He felt untouchable. Skatov believed he had cracked the code, a universal formula, combining mental rigidity, plant-based fuel, and sheer stubbornness. But the mountains are patient hunters. This surging confidence would become his closest ally and ultimately his potential executioner. Barely 3 weeks passed. That is the only buffer he allowed himself between the death trap of Annapurna and his next objective. Any sane physiologist would recommend months of recovery, but Atanas Skatov didn't have time for rest. He was already standing at the base of Makalu, the 5th highest peak on Earth, 8,485 meters above sea level. It is here in the thin air that strangles the lungs that he decides to showcase something rarely seen in high-altitude mountaineering. Not just the ability to suffer, but raw explosive speed. 94 hours. That is the grand total of time it took for him to rocket from base camp to the very tip of the summit. It was a literal blitzkrieg against the mountain. While rival expeditions are bogged down for weeks meticulously fixing safety ropes and praying for a break in the weather, Atanas essentially runs up the route. Of course, the old guard, the experts, and the climbing purists grumble in the background. They debate his aggressive style, criticizing his reliance on Sherpa support and supplemental oxygen. But the cold, hard numbers on the stopwatch are impossible to argue with. Skatov moves across the landscape with a terrifying level of efficiency, almost as if his body is burning a completely different grade of fuel than everyone else. For a moment, it seems he is invincible. Riding a massive wave of adrenaline and euphoria, he bags Annapurna and Makalu, 2 giant peaks in a single season. High on success, he immediately locks onto a third target, the deadly Dhaulagiri, but the mountains have a way of punishing speed. At an altitude of roughly 7,900 meters, the atmosphere turns violent. The weather breaks completely, the winds begin to howl, heavy clouds swallow the visibility, and the slope effectively becomes closed out. In the death zone, this isn't just bad luck, it is a direct order from nature to halt. Atanas recognizes that the window of opportunity is slamming shut, and he makes the only rational call available: retreat. He is agonizingly close, just one final desperate push from the summit, but the calculated risk has spiked far beyond the forecast. He heads down, leaving the peak unconquered. Then nature delivers another blow on Gasherbrum 2. On this mountain, he is forced to abort the mission even earlier, grinding to a halt at an altitude of approximately 6,350 meters. The slope itself begins to speak to him in the worst possible way. The snow feels unstable and gives way under his boots, while telltale cracks, the signature of a slab fracture, begin to appear. These are the screaming sirens of avalanche danger. It is one of those terrifying moments where your fitness and willpower don't matter. The mountain is making the decision for you. Continuing upward would be nothing short of suicide. His incredible winning streak has snapped. Instead of adding another 8,000er to his resume, he is met with a harsh, sobering reality check. Atanas is left alone in his tent, with his thoughts forced to confront the brutal truth of the high Himalayas. You cannot simply brute force your way to the top of the world, no matter how fast you are. He realizes that physical horsepower and a strict vegan diet are merely the foundation of the sport. At 8,000 meters, the real battle isn't fought with quadriceps and lungs, but with the mind. He begins to understand that psychology, the discipline to wait out a storm and the humility to swallow your pride, is infinitely more valuable than having the strongest muscles on the mountain. The lesson is finally learned. These peaks demand more than just passion. They require absolute ice-cold patience. Imagine running a marathon at your absolute physical limit, collapsing at the finish line, and then being told you have to stand up and run another one immediately, without a single break. That is the level of endurance required. May of 2017 becomes the moment of absolute triumph for Atanas Skatov. He returns to the Himalayas transformed not just as a participant, but as a peak-bagging machine. His first order of business is summiting Everest. This time, he selects the classic southern route, climbing from the Nepal side. With this success, he effectively conquers the world's greatest mountain from both ends, having now mastered both the north and south faces. This achievement instantly vaults him into an elite and tiny club of climbers. But what he does next borders on the impossible. While other climbers are rushing down to the oxygen-rich lowlands to recover their shattered bodies, Skatov pulls a complete 180. He stays up high. His target is Lhotse, the 4th highest peak on the planet, which sits right next door to Everest. Every second implies danger because time is working against him. Every hour spent at this crushing altitude drains the body's vital reserves. Yet Atanas pulls off the unthinkable. In a staggering 6 days, Everest and Lhotse, a massive doubleheader. He carves his name into the record books, becoming the first vegan in history to survive this insane double summit. Barely having time to shake the Himalayan dust from his boots, he refuses to head home for rest. The scene shifts instantly. He transports himself from the thin hypoxic air of Asia to the freezing, icy wilderness of Alaska. Denali, the highest and coldest point in North America, is waiting for him. And here Atanas completely rewrites his own rulebook. While in the Himalayas, he utilized Sherpa support and clipped into fixed ropes. Here he elects to go into the wild alone. Solo. For 17 grueling days, it is just one man against the polar freeze. Atanas hauls a heavy sled loaded with his survival gear, sets up his own camps, and is forced to make every life or death decision by himself. It is the ultimate test of complete self-reliance. He successfully stands on the summit, completing the prestigious 7 Summits Challenge. He becomes the first Bulgarian vegan to have stood on the rooftop of every continent on Earth. He returns to his homeland not just as a climber, but as a bona fide national hero. The man who was once a desk-bound scientist is now standing in the glare of the spotlight. Auditoriums are packed to the rafters with people hanging on his every word. He evolves into a motivational speaker, a living testament to the concept that human potential is truly limitless. Skatov finds himself at the absolute peak of his fame, his confidence, and his physical form. It seems like any goal he pinpoints on the map is well within his grasp. But fame and medals feel hollow when you know people are whispering behind your back, "He's not the real deal." Atanas Skatov is basking in the public's adoration, but inside the exclusive jagged club of elite mountaineers, he is viewed with cold, unyielding skepticism. The purists look past the summits. They analyze the style of the ascent. They point accusingly at the oxygen mask hiding his face and the Sherpas carrying the heavy loads. To them, this isn't true alpinism. It is high-altitude tourism for those who can afford the ticket. The shadow of the legendary Bulgarian climber Boyan Petrov looms over Skatov like a massive, insurmountable cliff. Petrov is an icon of pure style, a man who tackles 8,000ers without supplemental oxygen, fighting the altitude strictly one-on-one. The comparisons between the two are inevitable, and they land a painful blow to Atanas' pride. He realizes that to be truly accepted among the best, he has to play the game by their punishing rules. Then comes the year 2018. Skatov decides to give his critics the most definitive answer he possibly can. He sets his sights on Cho Oyu, the world's 6th highest peak. But this time the script is flipped completely. Atanas leaves the oxygen bottles behind. He forgoes the services of a personal Sherpa. This is no longer a commercial expedition. It is a solo battle for survival. Imagine the sensation: the air becomes so thin that every single step requires a titanic effort of will, and a heavy pack containing all your gear is digging mercilessly into your spine. No one is there to carry his load, and no one is breaking the trail through the deep snow for him. In this moment, we see not just an athlete, but a scientist conducting a final dangerous experiment in the death zone. Atanas is deliberately pushing his body into a state of severe oxygen deprivation to see if he can survive. The skeptics had loudly claimed that a vegan would break under this kind of pressure at altitude. But Skatov keeps moving. He plods forward, slowly pushing through the hypoxia that clouds the mind and turns legs into lead. He is proving that his body can function in an anaerobic state, even when pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance. When he finally stands on the summit of Cho Oyu, breathing the same thin, jagged air as the mountain itself, the arguments fall silent. He descends as a victor. This ascent becomes a major turning point in how he is perceived by the community. Now even his harshest critics are forced to admit the truth. This guy is a true high-altitude mountaineer. His home country greets him with a hero's welcome. Atanas receives the prestigious Golden Bulgaria Award and the title of Athlete of the Month. Now he possesses not just popularity, but undeniable legitimacy in the cutthroat world of big-time mountaineering. 4 deadly peaks in 140 days. That is not a sport, that is madness. The year 2019 turns into a true race for survival for Atanas Skatov. He no longer takes breaks. He is literally living in the death zone. His goal is the legendary Crown of the Himalayas, the 14 highest peaks on the planet. And he understands the urgency. It is now or never. He kicks into a gear that leaves observers breathless. The season begins with Kangchenjunga. The world's 3rd highest mountain is famous for its treachery and high death rate, but Atanas tackles it at a sprinter's pace. Picture this rhythm. He ascends to the summit and descends back to the safety of base camp in just one single day. 24 hours of non-stop grueling work at the limit of human capability. While other climbers are recovering in their tents, gasping for air, he is already planning his next move. July becomes a month of triumphant will. Skatov finds himself in the Karakoram range, facing the massive Gasherbrum Massif. Here he accomplishes the incredible Gasherbrum 1 and Gasherbrum 2. Two giant mountains. He spends a total of just 6 days conquering both of them. And most importantly, he does it without the help of personal Sherpas. Once again, he carries everything himself, yet moves faster than many climbers who are going light. This is no longer just mountaineering, it is an industrial assembly line for achieving goals. Autumn arrives, and Atanas returns to settle an old debt. Dhaulagiri. The mountain that rejected him a couple of years ago now yields to his relentless drive. He closes that chapter, putting a final bold mark on the season. The statistics are mind-boggling. 4 8,000ers summited in less than 5 months. This is an absolute national record for Bulgaria. None of his countrymen had ever operated with such terrifying efficiency. By the beginning of 2021, he has 10 of the 14 peaks under his belt. He is only 4 steps away from eternity. But behind this frantic pace lies more than just competitive drive. An invisible timer has started ticking. Skatov isn't rushing for no reason. Expeditions burn through money faster than they burn oxygen. He knows that funding is a fragile thing and sponsors expect results here and now. He is in a race against his own budget, understanding that the window of opportunity could slam shut at any moment due to a lack of funds. Imagine a place where the wind howls louder than a jet engine and the temperature drops to minus 60 degrees. Winter 2020. Atanas Skatov arrives at the foot of K2, the Savage Mountain. This isn't just another peak on his list, it is the last great bastion. At that time, K2 remained the only 8,000er on the planet that had never been summited in winter. It was the holy grail of mountaineering, and the whole world was chasing it. However, what greets Atanas upon his arrival at base camp is a far cry from a disciplined military unit. It looks more like a disturbed hornet's nest kicked over by a giant. It is a scene of absolute unmitigated chaos. Imagine over 60 ambitious climbers hailing from every corner of the globe, a jumbled mix of commercial tourists and hardened professional athletes all thrown together into one colorful, vibrating mass of humanity. The atmosphere is claustrophobic, deafening, and thick, with the heavy scent of raw ego. Honestly, it feels less like a serious, high-altitude expedition and more like a Tokyo subway station during rush hour. The air isn't just thin, it is crackling with electricity and rivalry. Every single person there knows the weather window is microscopic, and every single one of them is desperate to be the first to claim the prize. Then on January 16th, history is written, and the entire game changes in a heartbeat. A legendary squad of Nepali Sherpas achieves the unthinkable. They conquer the summit. Standing on the roof of the world, they belt out their national anthem, and the news strikes the camp below with the force of a lightning bolt. The race is over. The holy grail of mountaineering has been claimed. The sprint for first place has officially ended. You would think this would be a moment for everyone to exhale, pop some champagne, and applaud the victors. But for the climbers left behind, including Skatov, the dynamic shifts into something much darker. The expedition mutates from a race into a ferocious dogfight for personal glory. Nobody has come this far to return to sea level with nothing to show for it. But on that very same day, while the Nepalese triumph is still echoing in the air, a shockwave of tragedy slams into the camp. Sergei Mingote, a titan of Spanish mountaineering and a beloved figure among the group, takes a fall during his descent. In an instant, he is gone. The celebration dies in their throats. That festive energy evaporates instantly, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. K2 has decided to reveal its true, brutal nature. The climbers are paralyzed by shock. Many immediately start packing their gear to flee. The dream has turned into a nightmare, and the mountain is demanding a blood tax. Yet in the shadow of Mingote's tragic end, Atanas makes the decision to stay. He is carrying a psychological burden that is crushing him. It is not just the fear or the desire for fame, it is the suffocating pressure of obligation. Sponsors are demanding a return on their investment. His quest to conquer all 14 8,000ers is on the line, and his financial lifeline is about to snap. There is an invisible doomsday clock ticking loudly in his mind. He understands with crystal clarity that if he retreats now, there will be no second act. His logic and survival instincts are screaming at him to run to get off this cursed mountain, but his sheer willpower is dragging him upward step by agonizing step. For him, the mission has morphed into a matter of principle. It is now or never. Mark the date, February 4th. This is the day when human ambition smashes headfirst into a wall of brutal reality. The group initiates their final assault. They abandon the relative safety of the lower camps and begin scaling the Black Pyramid, a vertical wall of obsidian ice that looks like it leads directly into the stratosphere. Their objective is Camp 3, situated at a mind-bending altitude of 7,350 meters. In the world of high-altitude climbing, this is known as the assault camp, the final springboard before the death zone. Theoretically, this is a sanctuary where you catch your breath, melt snow for hydration down some hot soup, and summon every ounce of energy for the final push to the top. But when Atanas and his cohort finally claw their way onto the narrow ledge, they do not find salvation. They walk straight into a humanitarian disaster. The expedition's logistical backbone snaps right in front of them. A terrifying realization sets in: there are nowhere near enough tents. A significant portion of the survival gear has simply vanished, ripped from the mountain face by the hurricane-force winds that scream across the peak without pause. The rest of the equipment was never even hauled up, lost in the chaotic mismanagement of the climb. Visualize this nightmare on a tiny precarious shelf of rock, blasted by the fiercest winds on the planet. 25 shattered men and women are huddled together, and there is only enough shelter for a fraction of them. What follows is a surreal primal battle for a few inches of nylon shelter. Dozens of climbers force themselves into the 2 or 3 tents that haven't been destroyed. This is no longer a camp. It is a can of sardines thrown into a deep freezer. Inside, it is a hellscape of entangled limbs. There is no room to lie down, no room to move. People are sitting on top of each other, knees locked, elbows jamming into ribs. Atanas Skatov finds himself wedged into a corner, his body twisted into an agonizing, unnatural pretzel. Outside, the mercury drops to 35 degrees below zero, and the wind hammers the tent walls with such violence that it feels like the entire structure is about to be ripped from the anchors and tossed into the void. But the cold is not the true killer here. It is the thirst. In a crush, this severe lighting a stove to melt snow is a suicide mission. It is physically impossible. One slip could torch a down sleeping bag or the tent itself, killing everyone instantly. So they sit there parched and dying of thirst in the death zone, where the human body bleeds out moisture with every breath. When dawn finally breaks over the Karakoram range, it brings zero warmth. All it brings is a harsh, freezing clarity. After a sleepless night spent curled in the fetal position in that suffocating tent, Atanas comes to a grim realization. His biological batteries are drained. He is operating in the red. The combination of insomnia and severe dehydration at this monstrous altitude slams the body harder than a physical blow. Skatov is a man of science, a trained observer, and he does not deal in fantasies. He analyzes his physical state as coldly as he would a specimen under a microscope. The verdict from his internal voice is absolute and non-negotiable. His reserves are gone. To force his body upward in this depleted condition would be to voluntarily step off a cliff. While summit fever is blinding the others to the flashing warning signs, Atanas keeps his rationality intact. He looks up at the seductive summit of K2, the peak he has chased for so long, and gives it a firm no. He chooses life. He chooses to retreat. It is roughly 10 o'clock in the morning. While it is late to be moving, it is the perfect time to launch a self-rescue mission. Atanas clips his safety carabiner into the fixed lines. Flanking him is his loyal partner, the Sherpa Lakpa Dendi. Together, they turn their backs on the summit and begin the long descent away from the death zone. At this precise moment, a scene dripping with tragic irony plays out. Struggling upward against the wind, gasping for air, are other climbers still chasing the dream. The legendary Icelander, John Snorri, and the local hero of Pakistan, Ali Sadpara, cross paths with Skatov. They are marching upward toward their glory, and as history would later reveal, toward their graves. Their eyes lock for a fleeting second, 2 ships passing in the lethal night. While some embrace a risk that teeters on the edge of insanity, Atanas chooses safety. He believes the hardest decision, the decision to quit, is already behind him. He is convinced that with every meter he drops in elevation, oxygen will return to his blood and control will return to his limbs. Nobody in that moment could possibly know that this descent intended to save his life will be the shortest and most dramatic journey he ever takes. Imagine trying to down-climb the facade of a skyscraper that has been coated in a sheet of solid glass. That is an accurate description of the terrain Atanas Skatov is stepping onto. He is entering the notorious Black Pyramid. Geologically, it is a dark, imposing rock formation, but in the dead of winter, it transforms into a vertical ice rink. There's absolutely no margin for error here, no convenient ledges where you can stop and catch your breath. Technically speaking, this is the most treacherous sector of the entire mountain. Here, a climber cannot rely on their feet. They are entirely dependent on the rope and their mastery of technical gear. The mountain is merciless. The rock face is glazed with verglas, a thin, invisible, and terrifyingly slippery layer of hard ice. The metal spikes of his crampons scrape uselessly against the stone, desperate for purchase, but often finding nothing but air. The descent turns into an endless loop of mechanical robotic actions. Atanas must repeat the same life-or-death procedure over and over again. Approach a knot in the fixed line, unclip the safety carabiner, bypass the knot, and clip back into the next section of rope. Click. Pause. Click. He has to do this hundreds of times. It is a routine, yes, but a deadly one. Because for that fraction of a second between clips, you are effectively free soloing. You are untethered from the world. During this high-tension descent, Lakpa Dendi, the Sherpa guiding Skatov, does something that will later become the most critical piece of evidence in the investigation. He pulls out his camera and records a brief video clip. This footage stands as a unique, haunting document of the final moments of calm before the storm. We watch the footage and analyze Atanas. Does he look like a man in panic? Is he stumbling or losing consciousness? Absolutely not. On the screen, Skatov demonstrates total focus. His movements, while naturally slowed by the thick altitude suit and lack of oxygen, are sharp and deliberate. He handles the ropes with precision, checking his gear like a pro. His downsuit is intact, his harness is cinched tight, and his oxygen mask is fitted correctly. Visually, we are watching a professional who is in complete command of his environment. Lakpa Dendi, filming from a few feet above, has no idea he is capturing a chronicle of the final seconds before the catastrophe. This video creates a chilling dissonance in the narrative. We know for a fact that Atanas is shattered from a sleepless night and severe dehydration, but the camera lies. It hides the internal decay. It captures a man who seems to be navigating the terrain with confidence. He swaps carabiners, one after another, fighting the mountain for every meter of altitude he reclaims. It feels like the crisis is over, that the worst horror was left back in that suffocating tent at Camp 3. Skatov looks like a man who knows exactly what he is doing, methodically working his way back to the warmth of base camp. The clock reads 10:30 in the morning. Atanas approaches yet another anchor point to change ropes. This is standard operating procedure, a movement any climber performs hundreds of times on a single expedition. It is drilled into muscle memory, hardwired into the brain like breathing or blinking, but it is right here on this sheer sheet of ice at this fateful second that his internal computer suffers a catastrophic glitch. Look at his hands. They are encased in massive, thick, high-altitude mittens which rob his fingers of all sensitivity. He needs to execute a simple but strictly ordered algorithm. First, clip the safety line to the new anchor point below the knot. Then transfer the rappel device. Check the tension. And only then, listen to me closely, only then do you unclip from the safety of the rope above. It is the fundamental law of gravity: never detach until you are reattached. But Atanas' brain, starved of oxygen and battered by exhaustion, scrambles the sequence. Disaster doesn't always announce itself with a bang. Sometimes it arrives in the span of a single heartbeat. It takes less than a blink of an eye. Perhaps his brain, starved of oxygen, jumbles the critical sequence of safety procedures. Caught in a hypoxic fog where the world swims out of focus, he likely unclips the safety carabiner a split second too early. Or maybe the heavy frozen rope fails to seat correctly in the rappel device, and in his delirious state, the error slips past him unnoticed. His internal monologue betrays him, whispering a fatal lie: "You are hooked," and lean back. He puts his full faith in that signal. Atanas commits his entire body weight to the gear, his muscles relaxing as he anticipates the reassuring bite of the harness digging into his hips. He is absolutely certain the mechanical system has him. But the support he craves never comes. Instead of the tight, secure tension of the line, he feels something else entirely. Absolute nothingness. Just the terrified void. It is a microsecond of pure crystalline horror as the ground simply deletes itself from beneath his boots and his gloved hands claw uselessly at the thin, freezing air. But the most heartbreaking detail of this entire catastrophe isn't the fall itself. It is the condition of the safety lines he left behind. The rope remains there, dangling in the wind, completely perfect. It wasn't a frayed old line, the core didn't snap under stress, and the anchor point held fast to the mountain face. The hardware did not fail him. This isn't one of those equipment malfunctions you read about in sensational news reports. This is the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of human error, that precise moment when extreme fatigue reaches in and flips the switch on your survival instinct. Try to visualize the nightmare you are suspended, on a face of ice kicking your crampons into the wall, and then in one violent second, your entire reality inverts. Ali Sadpara, a world-class filmmaker and veteran mountaineer, is positioned just a short distance down the slope. He is locked into his own struggle, fighting for every breath against the biting wind and crushing exhaustion. Suddenly, a blur in his peripheral vision demands attention. He glances up and his brain initially refuses to accept what it is seeing. A human figure is flying through the air directly above him. It is unfolding with a terrifying, unnatural velocity that defies logic. Sadpara freezes in his tracks. But the most haunting aspect of this scene isn't the visual horror, it is the auditory void, or rather, the complete absence of human sound. Here, amidst the deafening roar of the gale, there is a vacuum-like silence coming from the falling climber. Atanas does not scream. There is no shriek of panic, no desperate plea for help. He streaks past the stunned witnesses like a silent shadow resembling a boulder that is torn loose from the summit rather than a man. No one has even a fraction of a second to reach out a hand or shout a warning. The event lasts barely a heartbeat, but for those watching it dilates into a horrifying eternity. Then the brutal physics of a high-altitude freefall take over. Atanas plummets down the steep ice couloir for nearly 2 kilometers. The merciless gravity and the jagged terrain show no quarter. His body accelerates to a terminal velocity, tumbling violently and striking rocky outcrops along the way. His descent is only arrested at the very foot of the wall, coming to a rest near an altitude of 5,500 meters. In a twist of tragic irony, he returns to the very location where expeditions typically launch their dreams of touching the stars. For the climbers watching from above, he is reduced to a tiny dark speck against the vast white canvas of the glacier, a stark reminder of just how fragile the human vessel is when pitted against the majesty and indifference of K2. Typically, K2 behaves like a greedy collector. She tends to keep the souls who stumble upon her flanks. The vast majority of climbers who perish in the so-called death zone become eternal fixtures of the mountain, frozen in time and completely unreachable by rescue teams. But on this day, the savage mountain makes a rare, almost mystical exception. The Sherpas locate Atanas' body. He isn't lost in a bottomless crevasse or an inaccessible ravine, but lying near the advanced base camp. Paradoxically, a fall of this magnitude offers a unique opportunity for closure. The Pakistani military responds with immediate urgency. A high-performance military helicopter claws its way into the sky. For these pilots, this is far from a routine sortie. It is a display of supreme aviator skill, pushing the aircraft to the ragged edge of its operational envelope. The rotor blades struggle to bite into the thin, low-density air while the engines scream in protest under the immense strain. The flight crew gambles with their own lives, threading the needle between sheer granite walls to retrieve a man who lost his war with the mountain but retained his dignity. They secure their precious cargo and lift him away from the white silence, descending toward the valley floor where there is oxygen, life, and warmth. The helicopter banks and sets a course for Skardu, the nearest outpost with a functional airstrip. This extraction becomes a symbolic act of mercy. Throughout the entire blood-soaked history of K2, you can count on the fingers of one hand how often a family has been granted the privilege of burying a body recovered from such heights. Usually, grieving families are left with nothing but memories and photographs of a distant, jagged skyline. But Atanas is coming home. Meanwhile, down at the base camp, a quiet, devastating personal drama is reaching its climax. There, among the flapping tents and the agonizing weight, sits his fiancée. She had traveled to this desolate place to be his anchor, to support his dream, and to welcome his triumphant return. But instead of hearing her beloved's voice crackle over the radio, she is met with the clipped, somber tone of the expedition leader. She is the first to absorb the blow. Picture that scene, the chaotic noise of the camp gear being packed, the wind howling. And for her, the spinning world simply grinds to a halt. The fragile hope she had clung to until the final second is instantly displaced by a crushing, suffocating emptiness. She doesn't have to wonder about his fate. The mountain gave him back to her, just not in the way they had ever dared to dream. In the immediate aftermath of the evacuation, the gears of international diplomacy begin to grind. Bulgaria refuses to abandon its fallen son. The government orchestrates a complex logistical mission to transport his remains from the remote ranges of Pakistan all the way back to Sofia. The entire nation prepares to receive a man who dedicated his life to proving that the only true boundaries are the ones we construct in our own minds, even if that wisdom was purchased at the ultimate price. However, the moment the news of the tragedy breaks to the wider world, the media landscape explodes with sensationalism. Journalists and keyboard experts immediately scramble to find a villain. The narrative they construct is simple, digestible, and convenient: a broken rope. The internet catches fire with accusations directed at the expedition organizers. Rumors fly that they cut corners on safety gear, alleging that the fixed lines were ancient and frayed. It is the perfect conspiracy theory. It neatly shifts the blame away from individual error and places it squarely on a piece of faulty nylon. But then the cold, hard facts begin to surface. The expedition company and Atanas' own climbing partner issue a sharp factual rebuttal. They offer no excuses, only evidence. They fight back with the truth. Lakpa Dendi, the Sherpa who was climbing directly alongside him, becomes the crucial witness. His testimony is unshakable. Mere moments after Skatov fell, Dendi descended safely using the exact same section of rope. It did not snap. It wasn't frayed. The anchor points didn't rip from the ice. The fixed lines were brand new, installed only 24 hours before the summit push. The gear held up perfectly. The equipment performed exactly as designed. Investigators and experts strip away the layers of speculation, leaving only the chilling truth. The official cause of death is recorded in clinical terms, but behind the medical jargon lies an abyss of physical suffering, a simple mistake born of shattering exhaustion. In the International Classification of Accidents, it is labeled as overexertion. It is a physiological state where the body essentially unplugs the brain to conserve the last few scraps of glucose and energy. The investigation confirms the timeline that morning. On the slope, there was no avalanche, no rockfall that could have swept a climber from the face. There were no external forces at play. Nature did not strike the fatal blow. Atanas wasn't a victim of the elements in the traditional sense. The tragedy is terrifyingly simple. In the delicate chain of climber gear and mountain, the weakest link proved to be the climber himself. It is a textbook example of human error, where a single fumbled movement by a hand, trembling with fatigue, can erase years of training and thousands of meters of ascent. Look at the calendar. February 5th, 2021 marks a dark chapter in modern mountaineering history. But Skatov's fall wasn't an isolated event. It was merely the opening bell of a season defined by death. Because even as rescuers work frantically to evacuate his body higher up the slope, deep in the death zone, an even darker and more mysterious tragedy is unfolding. 3 other climbers, the legendary Icelander John Snorri, Pakistan's national hero Ali Sadpara, and Juan Pablo Mohr of Chile, are still pushing blindly for the summit. They are climbing directly into the very danger Atanas was trying to escape. And then they simply vanish. They dissolve into the whiteout, never to be seen alive again. This winter season on K2, which began as a celebration of human resilience, descends rapidly into an absolute nightmare. By the end, the mountain claims 5 lives, 5 elite athletes, 5 unique stories cut short in their prime. First, it was Sergei Mingote, now Atanas. And following him, the entire summit team is erased from the map. The Bulgarian's death transforms into a terrifying omen, a clear signal that the mountain had finished forgiving mistakes. But if you look past the mysticism, you find a cold, brutal logic. Let's be honest, the root of the problem wasn't just the ice and rock. It was in the organization. That critical shortage of tents at Camp 3, the logistical failure that robbed Skatov of sleep and strength, that wasn't just bad luck. It was the direct result of a commercial race. Outfitters sell the dream to dozens of clients, but the infrastructure is stretched until it snaps. This chaos becomes the catalyst for tragedy. If Atanas had possessed a proper shelter to rest and rehydrate, that night his mind would likely have been sharp when the moment came to clip his safety line. Here we see a personal tragedy converging violently with a systemic failure. Atanas Skatov became a victim of a perfect storm. On one side, his own profound exhaustion accumulated over a sleepless, freezing night. On the other, an industry that in its relentless race for records and revenue was cutting corners on basic safety protocols. He didn't die simply because he was weak. He died because he found himself standing at the precise, deadly intersection of human error and organizational negligence. Flags across Sofia are lowered to half-mast. Bulgaria isn't just mourning an athlete, it is saying goodbye to a national icon. The Prime Minister describes him as a man of immense purpose, and in the end, he is absolutely right. Ultimately, Atanas emerged victorious in the most defining scientific debate of his life. He left behind undeniable confirmation for the world to see absolute proof that a strictly plant-based lifestyle is fully compatible with the grueling physical demands of extreme altitude mountaineering. Having successfully conquered 10 separate peaks standing above 8,000 meters, he provided an unshakable argument that completely dismantles the old stereotypes about strength and diet. However, his lasting impact is measured in far more than just altitude statistics or climbing records. His published books have served as a catalyst for thousands of ordinary people, inspiring them to leave the safety of their couches and chase their own adventures in the mountains. Skatov will be immortalized exactly how he wished as both a rigorous scientist and a boundless dreamer. He was a man who treated his own life as his most dangerous and daring experiment, proving something profound to us all: that the boundaries we fear the most are rarely physical. Instead, the only true limits that exist are the psychological barriers we construct within our own minds.